Welcome to the Beyond Body podcast with your hosts, Mia and Holly. Join us for a sometimes fortnightly podcast
where we explore all things mental health, being a messy human, and how to get the most out of this one precious life.
and all the ridiculous stories in between.
Hi, Sunny.
Oh, no, don't. Oh,
I'll remember.
I appreciate that. I think because it's not natural for me to respond to it, that I just freeze. But that was quite natural. I just need to work on my part of it.
So excitingly, what I have been promising for weeks, which is that, guys, the next time we talk to Holly, the next time, we're chatting to each other, she's going to be on this amazing journey. And now you actually are there.
I am well and truly joining you from the Portugal coast at 7 a.m. with my very non-espresso coffee.
No espressos?
No, definitely not.
Okay.
No.
Right.
Can indeed get a lot of weak cappuccinos in Europe, which has been delightful.
And necessary, turning your whole schedule upside down and meeting with clients at the crack of.
Necessary for my dear 5 a.m. clients who get me, it's half dark. We're making it work.
Give us some highlights. Tell us what's happening.
I honestly have just had such an easy time. I think when people think about overseas traveling, it can feel like it's this big, scary thing. And I just feel like I've slotted into this very easy life. I mean, I've been really lucky. I've just moved into a place with people who are now such good friends. The sun has been shining. It's been very easy. I mean, the only really chaotic thing that's happened, I mean, I had COVID last week, which was fine. But I got a little Vespa to drive around on.
Cute.
I'm just thinking it was sort of like Bali where everyone's on a scooter and it's not. Portuguese drivers are crazy. They are crazy. So I returned.
Bali on a scooter is every time someone goes there, I'm like, do not get on a scooter, do not get on a motorbike unless somebody else is driving it. It's the number one way people die in Bali.
But I also think because everyone's on a scooter in Bali, the traffic is quite slow.
Yeah.
How do you get around? How do you get around in Bali?
Driver.
I
walk everywhere. And wherever I stay, I always make sure it's central to all my favorite spots to get to, because I like that immersion in the local village kind of feeling where you're up early and the locals looking at you like, what are you doing? Are you meant to be on holiday? Why are you up at 6 o'clock in the morning?
I love riding my little scoot when I go to Bali. It's one of my favorite parts of the experience. Wait, when we go to Bali, will you get on the back of the scooter if I'm driving?
Absolutely not. Absolutely. I'll be I'll see you there. See you 20 minutes later, battling the traffic in a car.
Yeah, okay. I'll see you in an hour later.
Or as an actual responsible boss, I will just tackle you into the car with me.
No chance. I think that's my favorite part of Bali. To be fair, I think I was 21 and I did a semester in Vietnam, so I had to learn to ride a scooter there. So it does feel like it's very second nature.
Yeah.
Until you're riding in Portugal and cars are trying to drive you off the road. So I've returned the scooter. But other than that, I've been having the best time. Just been working and surfing and hanging out. It's been very social. But then also having a lot of nice downtime.
Love it. Love to hear it. You have inspired me. You may have seen on my Instagram stories because I saw you responded to it, where I was like, I'm thinking about coming to London in March. How can I work some actual genuine reasons to go over there? I've had such a strong following from the UK and EU. And they're always like, will you ever come over here? And I'm like, I don't really have a reason to get on a 24-hour flight. But it could also be owing to the fact that for some reason I've been watching a lot of Made in Chelsea recently. That terrible reality TV show.
I know the one.
Yeah. So I was like, that's reason enough. I start watching a TV show and just start planning my whole life around it. But something very exciting coming up next month is my recovery anniversary, which is going to be 11 years. And that is, I can't remember which day in August. I think it's August 19th or something. And around that same time, I have been asked to consult on a Disney program for a book for one of my favorite authors. It's going to be a very, I think, reflective, recovery-oriented like last year didn't, even though it was 10 years, didn't feel like a big deal. But for some reason, I think coinciding with that has been, yeah, I feel like 11 years is going to be even bigger than 10.
Wow, that is so exciting.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I was so touched. I think on one of the last episodes where you sort of said that for a while you would make like a celebration of it, of your anniversary. I think that's just so special. I feel like more people should embrace that.
So we have some part two kind of stuff to do this week because last episode we unpacked some of the indicators that you might have relapsed and some of the ways to get it back on the rails. And this week we wanted to flesh out a little bit of how we personally relate to relapse in terms of our own recovery processes, what we've observed in our client work as well, and the other side of what we need to do around, insulating ourselves in terms of relapse prevention, which is what do we do beforehand? What are the things we need to consider before the possibility of relapse even surfaces? So we've got a few questions here, like I said, that range from our own experience to some of our more clinical observations. First one is, did we ever relapse or come close to it in our recoveries? And obviously, there are sometimes multiple attempts at recovery. So, this could be spanning over a long period of time. Any memories for you which come close to sort of relapse territory?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I also just think the words lapse and relapse are so nuanced. And I think there's so many different understandings of what it actually is. And I think something that, I am sure you do as well, really try to instill in clients. And what we're sort of saying last episode is that it actually doesn't have to be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And I think even just because there's so much fear around these experiences, I think it's one of those things where people have so much fear around it that it actually stops them from wanting to learn more about it or plan for it even, or think about how we can avoid it because there is so much fear there. But when I reflect on my own recovery, I mean, I was never given the label or gave myself the label of relapsing.
Mm.
And maybe if I knew then what I know now, I would have absolutely said I lapsed for sure, quite a few times.
Mm.
I think my perspective at the time wasn't necessarily that I lapsed, but that was just probably because I didn't necessarily have the language for it at the time, but rather that I just thought my recovery was sucking at that time.
Yeah.
Which feels like it feels really like hard and negative. But I think if I had a process sort of, and I'm talking like early stages of my recovery. If I had a process like we'll sort of explore today, I think that would have made it a lot easier for me to get my head back in the game as opposed to just feeling like, oh, I'm really sucking at this thing that I really want.
Yeah.
Because I think that for me, that just started a lot of sort of negative criticism really easily. But I didn't experience something that I sort of see or hear clients experiencing a lot is feeling like, they're back at step one.
Yes.
Because like we were saying last episode, I don't think we ever go back to where we were because every time we reach a crossroad that might feel a little bit all too familiar, we're the thing that is different. And I think each time we're met with struggle, we hopefully have a little bit more awareness under our belt or a little bit more knowing that this struggle isn't going to define us and it can't last forever. Nothing does.
Yeah.
And that actually it might be that little missing piece that you needed. Because like sort of, I guess like what I just said there was what that version of me needed all those years ago to understand that as opposed to being like, I'm just sucking at this thing that I really want. I mean, if we're talking like physiologically and if like losing a significant amount of weight is part of your behavioral profile, then yeah, physically you might be in the same spot as you were, but that still doesn't erase the information. It just gets clouded. I think recovery or not, every single day in this life, we will learn something. And then the next day, we can take that something, however small it is, and use it to help us make different decisions the next day. So in that sense, like I never completely relapsed, but I lapsed so many times and I'm actually glad that I did.
Yeah.
I think because it is like the word is just so heavy, but like we were saying, it doesn't have to be inevitable, but I don't think a lapse or a few lapses is a bad thing either. I think for me, it was actually a really important part of the process because, no uphill trajectory is going to come without a few big stumbles and falling down and having to pick yourself back up.
Yeah.
And I think in those times, like I just learned so much more about my experience. I think the times that I fell back into the behaviors that, I had either significantly reduced or was like attempting to reduce, it made me a lot stronger because I had to work at it so much more and I had to put that awareness back into a place where maybe I dropped the ball a little bit. Or another really big thing for me that really coincided with lapses was, and something I struggled with, that I really had to learn to separate my anxiety or depressive lows from my eating disorder.
Mm.
And I had to learn that I could be anxious or I could have a bad PMDD month without those experiences needing to be a trigger for my eating disorder because they were just so intertwined for such a long time. I was like, I'm feeling this way. Therefore, I'm going to engage in the eating disorder as well. So once I was able to make that separation, it felt a lot more achievable to manage my just internal landscape of my mental health.
Yeah.
And then just find a bit more like trust and understanding for the natural ebbs and flows as well. Because I think lapsing it puts things into perspective because it's not supposed to be perfect, and you're not supposed to have all the answers at the beginning. You need to have, these experiences of adversity so you can then gain the resilience. So, in summary, yes, I'd say I did lapse.
I really, I think it's so important to put in that distinction around lapses and relapses because
Mm.
as I've mentioned to you, I'm working on another big project at the moment around metaphors. We know I love a metaphor, and I was literally typing this one up today, and I was like, how funny that this is what we're talking about today. Because one of my favorite go-tos in terms of metaphors is a lapse is an overnight stay in a rundown motel. A relapse is waking up the next morning and booking in for the year, which is exactly what you're saying. Like, what you choose to do with that night that might have been inevitable. Like maybe you really did need to pull the car over because you were stuck in a storm that was literally like visibility was nothing. The sun was going down, like it was dangerous for you to, or it felt dangerous for you to keep going. And so you stopped in this shady part of town in this awful, like bed bug ridden place. It's not inevitable that you have to stay there. And even though the idea of waking up and getting back in that car the next day and figuring out the next leg of the journey is scary, how scary is that compared to waking up in that motel on the, 365th day of that booking and being like, I feel so far away from the place where I was last in the car, right? So having that distinction is so important because I think it does speak to the fact that this is not inevitable. You do not have to see every lapse turn into a relapse. And I had various attempts at recovery before the last one, and all of them were self-directed. I didn't even really know that I was in recovery because I think I was so deeply in denial that I even had an eating disorder. So how could you change what you can't acknowledge? So there were so many instances, but even in the last one, like you, I probably was more teetering on lapse, potentially turning into relapse. And I had kind of the inversion of what you said, which is that I was doing too much to separate my mental health and my recovery, that I was so focused on the practicality of recovery and so focused on what I had to be doing that I wasn't conscious of the natural life stuff that needed my attention as well. And I got hit with this information, someone who I had known um, wasn't in contact with at the time, but someone I had known passed away while I was in recovery in a way that I almost lost my life to at the end of my eating disorder. And that hit me like I hadn't anticipated, but that again, because I wasn't conscious of how fragile my mental state had been when I went into recovery. And I, as you know, like practical girl, give me stuff to do, love that. But I hadn't yet sort of acknowledged that compassion piece of the work that I needed to do because I hadn't reached that yet. I went into recovery with a lot of self-hatred and a lot of self-loathing, which is why the practical stuff made sense to me. The evidence-based stuff made sense to me, but my humanity, I hadn't quite taken care of that properly just yet. So like you said, as much as it was me at the precipice of either like falling into this canyon or getting from one side to the other over this bridge that the next bit of recovery could be. Luckily, it was a bridge because I think it was probably the start of my ability to see myself with some real compassion and a real sense of like how my life had got to the point that it had and how I'd come to have such a low regard for myself.
Yeah, that's do you think that if you hadn't had that experience where you sort of were really thrown by this person passing away, that your recovery wouldn't, like, do you think it would have been as strong? Do you feel like that was a really necessary part
Yeah,
to you
absolutely.
understanding the humanity and understanding, okay, this is the missing piece?
Yeah, it was one of the first times my psychologist said, I feel like I'm really seeing like the deeper, rawer version of you because I'm the person, like as I'm sure you were, I'm one of those people who goes into therapy and the therapist is like, you have so much self-awareness. And I'm like, yes, I think that's part of the problem. Like I'm there helping them, help me, like giving them like, here's all the information you need. And you know what? I'm also going to try this and that. Like I come with all of the engagement and all the information and all the stuff, but in terms of the just being able to sit with myself and to show this really vulnerable layer, I had never done that before and didn't even realize I felt like I'd failed sitting in front of her. Like I'd failed by having this reaction, this incredibly understandable human, very triggered reaction on a visceral level. And I felt like I'd failed. And she was like, no, this is where the light needs to get to. Light is, our greatest disinfectant. And this is a part of you that needs, we need to be able to access to be able to heal. So it was a real turning point as far as like, oh, not only is this messy, it absolutely has to be.
Yeah, it absolutely has to be. And I think this really speaks to everyone who is in recovery, or whether it's from an eating disorder or disordered eating, whatever it might be, that you actually can't just focus on like the behaviors and like the symptom stuff. Like it's about learning who you are. And for some people, like someone might be just naturally a more highly anxious person and run a little bit more anxious, or maybe they do have, whether it's trauma or family experience or something that also needs a bit of airtime, so that you can best put yourself in this position where you can orientate yourself towards, this is where I want to go. But to do that, you actually have to have all the information, and you have to really figure out all these other pieces of the puzzle. So I think even though our experiences were so different and like really opposing in a lot of ways, they were both doing that. They were both offering us this information and this data so we could best support ourselves moving forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we obviously talk a lot about the importance of the practicality of recovery, because that's so much of what we do. And it's been such a missing piece, but it's why we also make it very clear to clients right through from like the consultation orientation stage, like taking care of that soul and psychological part of you is so important as well. Because it's like when people come to me and say, but Mia, I've done so much therapy. Like I've done so much therapy and now I just want to work with you. And I'm like, that could be the case. Like that could absolutely work. However, if there's still an eating disorder, it's probably still there trying to protect some stuff. So it might have been shielding your past therapy experiences from even going there. So we might peel some layers back, and, that vulnerable part of you needs that support as well. And a reminder, we are not therapists.
I mean, if we had $1 for every time a client says, I've been in therapy for a long time and it hasn't worked, I'd be like, babe, join the club.
Yeah. But there's a formula there too, and we've got it figured out. So we'll help sort of sync up all the ways that we can maybe make that more effective within the team. So obviously there's what we've anecdotally experienced, but we've also been in a position to observe people going through the ebbs and flows of recovery, the ups and downs, the lapses, the relapses. What are some of the main contributors to lapse or relapse that you've seen pop up across client work?
I think this is really interesting because I had so many here. There's so many different experiences that could be that precedent to then going into lapse or relapse. I feel like one of the biggest ones that I see very often is poor body image, or that fear of weight gain. And then I think then that sort of comes with this very strong link between body image and self-esteem, and feeling like one's self-worth is tied to appearance, or not necessarily having done the work to unpack and challenge that whilst living and recovering in community. So I feel like that's one of probably the biggest things that I sort of see getting someone kind of on that edge of being like, oh, I could lapse, I could relapse, because it sort of often is sort of this underlying fear of, even through someone's recovery, when they're doing this like really great work, often can sort of be like not quite clicked with the idea of like, I actually will be okay in a recovering body. They sort of like have that like very strong eating disorder belief of, I won't be okay. I won't be okay gaining weight. It's a very significant thing I see with a lot of clients. So I'd say that would probably be my number one.
Yeah, me too. That was the first one for me. And I think there's so many reasons for it. And one of them is this very old guard thing. Like when I was starting recovery and I would be running into body image walls, I would look up resources and stuff. And the dominant message was, we can't work on body image with people until the end. And I was like, what? Like, but this is when it's like feeling like it's worse. And so it's why I became so passionate about body neutrality as a philosophy, implementing some practical strategies to help people to at least get the distress down as much as possible, to get the body monitoring down as much as possible. Because when I can see that somebody's on the start of that lapse, almost relapse spiral, some of the questions I'll ask them is, did you weigh yourself recently? did you get weighed and you heard the number or thought you heard the number, or you thought you saw a look on your doctor's face that told you something that maybe it didn't really tell you? Where did we go and buy some more food scales after throwing them out? Have you downloaded my Fitness Pal? Usually some of those tracking behaviors coming back in, there's something about the draw card and the pull of numbers and going back to that hyperfixation that is incredibly triggering for people, and is such a quick way for them to just fall apart a little bit. But certainly the body image stuff, when body monitoring goes up, they might have had an interaction with somebody that's been really unproductive, or again, like whether or not it was just directly a really unhelpful comment or something that they've heard that maybe it wasn't intended that way, but eating disorder was there at the time, listening to it and receiving it. So I think that there's some practical things people do with their bodies that can trigger it. But I think certainly just going through those periods where body image is going to be more difficult, which is why we have to give people at least the ability to avoid that. We don't have to go straight to, let's work on loving your body. Let's work on accepting your body. That is so unrealistic for, a large part of the process. Making it torturous is not a necessity.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It is definitely, it's so interesting you say that. I think the numbers do have this like 0 to 100 pull of people sort of, if you're going to have an eating disorder freak out, if I'm going to get a message from or an email from a client that's an eating disorder freak out, that. And they will often be, I'm aware this is my eating disorder, but I just needed the space to share this because I'm freaking out. It's pretty wild psychologically when we think about it, the pull that these numerical value can have. Because I think also if someone has been doing that work to learn to really trust their body and to understand their hunger and fullness and trying to find like a sense of safety in their body and mind, and then the number challenges that, it can kind of feel like a lot of that stuff, it's almost like putting together a vase that's like not yet glued and just like putting the pieces back together, it can like make it incredibly wobbly. So I feel like, yes, that's absolutely the number one thing. But there was a lot of others that I thought of as well. I think one that I've witnessed is sort of having a lack of a strong social network or professional network. Because I then think this can then add to the likelihood of just having a bit of a slower response to any treatment interventions that there might be. Because if you don't have sort of those people, whether it's on your team or your personal life, where you feel safe to ask for help, or they might be the person that brings something to you in the first place, it can be a lot easier to stay in that state of denial, and particularly that maybe they're even also in that state of not yet feeling like they want to have intervention, which is if someone's in that like eating disorder fuck it state, or in that state of romanticizing the eating disorder because they aren't yet seeing the really crap aspect. They've got the eating disorder rose tinted glasses and they're like firmly fastened. I feel like that's also a really, really risky place for someone to be, because then they probably aren't in that state of being like, okay, yeah, cool, like where's our plan? This is what we need to do, because then don't necessarily yet feel ready for it.
Yes, it's why I often, well, not often, whenever, like part of my orientation with clients is at the end of the first session, I'll get them to do that worst day of my eating disorder exercise from the 8 keys. And not because I say to them, I know the first writing assignment is not rainbows and hugs and puppies, but it is important because it's a bookend, and it's a bookend we'll probably revisit, because your eating disorder will at times want to pop its rose-colored glasses on. It's going to romanticize its position. It's going to tell you how much easier it was and how much better it was for you, and that you were happier and more confident, etc. So like, let's really go to the place where eating disorder was most dominant and tell the truth about what was going on, because it may, at the time they're like, why am I doing this? But inevitably I'm going to be like, go and pull out that initial thing that you wrote and tell me again how your eating disorder served all of these functions without there being major consequences on the other side, right? Which is not to say, as always, autonomy and agency, if that they can go and do whatever they want to do with how they're feeling and what they want to do with their process, but let's do it from an informed perspective. And clearly a part of them knows it's not the answer. But yes, absolutely. I think, to sort of piggyback on what you were saying, I think another contributor to relapse can be sort of that lack of social network and lack of purpose and meaning and motivation, that you're not necessarily, you don't have to come into coaching with like, I've got this great social life and I've got this amazing family and I have this beautiful partner and I have like whatever those features are of what you want from your life. Most people are not going to come with that stuff or close to as much of that stuff as they want. our job as coaches is to kind of pull everything forward a little bit at the same time. And part of that as well is like getting you back into your life. So those natural motivators show up so that as you're getting better and life's getting better, the trade-off becomes, okay, sure, my eating disorder might show up one day and go, I'm really uncomfortable in my body. I want to go back. But look at everything I have to give up to do that. And when I do that calculation, is this body really as unsafe and terrible as I've told myself? Because look at everything it's given me access to.
Yes, I agree completely. And then just to piggyback off of that again, on the,
Be like a human pyramid in a minute.
just on the low motivation piece, because I mean, we know that motivation, it's like an emotion, like it comes and it goes, and it's not realistic to have a high level of motivation all the time. But I do feel like if someone has sort of had a pretty consistent level of low motivation sort of during treatment so far, and they haven't yet had those experiences of recovery that offer that higher level of strong motivation, because I think that excitement about recovery or feeling like, oh, like this is clicking and it's working and I'm getting it. I think those experiences are so important because they really work as that reference point of memory, that recovery doesn't actually have to be awful all the time. So I think particularly I sort of see this as someone super fresh, they're super green in recovery and haven't been in the process for long enough to have some of those light bulb moments of being like, oh, I actually didn't think about my body for half of the day, or like it was actually not that bad to eat this meal, or I actually didn't engage in these behaviors once, or whatever it is. If they haven't been in it long enough to sort of get those little reference points, I also think that can sort of be why people sort of like start quite a lot at the beginning, because they don't yet have that higher level of motivation, which I think only comes from some of those experiences that make you really be like, yeah, like I'm feeling really proud of myself, or like, yeah, I kind of get this.
Yeah. There's another one that you and I know we've experienced this a lot with clients, which is travel.
Oh, travel.
Right.
Travel's a big one because it's kind of the classic of like everyone wants to run before they can walk, guys.
Nope.
I mean, it's so interesting for me traveling at the moment because obviously when I'm traveling, it's really easy to think back to times in which like I the last time I came to Europe, which was like pre-COVID time, I was in recovery and it was not a good idea. I did it and it was all right, but it threw my recovery a lot. And I came back and I was definitely in a worse spot than when I left. And like this is when you're traveling on your own or when you're traveling in general, it's like you have no idea what meals you're eating in the day. Like you shouldn't. You're traveling. You don't get to have that level of planning, and that's normal. Like that's traveling. You don't know if you're going to move your body. That is also where there's so much potential for growth, but you need to have that baseline of like, I'm very strong in doing this so that you can be okay with that higher level of potential distress tolerance. Because once you kind of get over that and you can really embrace it and you can say, yes, there's so much opportunity to get those high levels of recovery motivation, be like, this is this thing that I get to do because I've done all this work. But I think travel can be such a tricky thing for people in recovery, which I think, if you are someone in recovery and you happen to be traveling, whether it's a family holiday or with your partner or something, going with people who are aware of your situation and help them, having to lean on them is probably like the thing that I would recommend if you felt like if it was absolutely necessary to be traveling. But if not, I think it's pretty important to stay home and do a lot of the baseline work first.
Totally. And have some really good markers of like, can you do weekends away? Can you do a lot of spontaneous eating and not just like, oh, someone surprises you with where you're going to have lunch one time in the day, but like every lunch and snack is not something that's necessarily in your hands. I think there's so many things that we can do to help to test somebody's sort of level of resilience, because I'll see people who are like quite far in the process, but there's a reason why on raves, spontaneity is the last part of the acronym, because it's probably not the part that you've had a lot of work in, even if you're quite far into the process. And like we get to do cool stuff. Well, this kind of like leads into the next question, which is how do you think coaching can help people in terms of like some of this relapse prevention stuff? And even in this area, like we get to do some really cool stuff, like you'll always give the client the heads up. You don't just drop this on them. And this is really towards the end of the process. And it's more something you do with, one-to-one in-person work, but where you'll say to a client, let's do a meal support session next week. And you are going to order something and I'm going to order something really sad and like salad, no dressing. Like it's the meal sessions for us are usually great fun because we get to eat a lot of really great stuff. This is the meal session that sucks. Like you are not looking forward to this session. But it's planned, but it's also spontaneously kind of helping somebody look at some of those real life challenges that they are going to go to lunch with someone who they think is really intuitive and has a great relationship with food and will suddenly drop on you that they're fasting or that they don't eat carbs anymore or whatever, right? So we get to do all this great gap filling stuff. And I think with the travel area, that's where a coach can be such a great gap filler and strengthener, because we don't leave any of the like the little itty bitty stuff behind. And with travel, I just think that's so crucial to make sure you're ready.
Absolutely, because like a coach is like our role is predominantly how to. Like
Yeah.
this is this is how to recover from an eating disorder. These are the steps. I think just that's also the lack of working on flexibility and spontaneity is also very much something that I see sort of be a reason that people fall into lapse or relapse. Because yeah, someone can like eat a meal plan and have like heaps of like variety of food in it and like they're really consistent and they've got self accountability. But like if that's thrown on its head or they haven't practiced the flexibility or they can't go out and spontaneously order something from a bakery, that's you can't live in the confines of your little eating disorder box forever. Like that's still like the confines are bigger, like the box is a bit bigger, but
Yeah.
you're still in the box. Which sort of, I use that language of helping clients like get out of the box when we're doing the flexibility part of being like, what would that actually look like? That's
Yeah.
also sort of that step from, cool, you can eat your 3 meals and 3 snacks like really solidly, but can we find flexibility in that? Because do you really want to be on the meal plan for the rest of your life? What does that actually look like? Maybe, for example, that's, you're going for a walk with a friend in the morning and then you're going out for breakfast, but it's not going to be till 10 a.m. It's like, well, you're having your snack before that. That's what that's going to look like. It's like you're being intuitive with it, but you still are aware of your mental state and your vulnerabilities that you need to be eating X amount of food, but can we be doing it in a different way? So I think that flexibility piece is so important and coaches help with that so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I see so much discourse being like, a meal plan's the answer. Is this the answer? And it's like, it's a progression, everyone.
Mm.
Like, it is a progression. Like, if our job was to like work to someone's meal plan and then be like, well done, you're now eating your 3 meals and your 3 snacks with this amount of variety, and you can have a little bit of this and a bit of that. Bye, see you later. We're waiting for their intuition to show up and for their actual natural hunger, fullness, satiation, all those things to take over, so that that safety net that we've put up under them with a meal plan, and as you say, like a bit of that growing box until they don't need the box anymore. There are no confines, there is no ceiling, and that we are such a crucial part of that process, because it can feel like, think about how it used to be. You went to hospital or nothing. You either
Mm.
had,
Yep.
like I only had a psychologist, right? So I was really just making a lot of stuff up as I went along, which is why I loved coaching, because I looked back and I was like, oh, I was like my own coach. I was like making things up for myself and they were very practical and they worked. Some of them were a little bit of an experiment, but it's okay. I was my only subject. But yeah, there's just so much that we can do to get from the incremental parts of recovery, which can often be like very BMI focused and very weight focused and very body focused and health focused, and then really help people to get, I mean, look at what we do with the retreat, right? Like that's purpose and meaning, putting wings on recovery, really getting people to pull out what might have at that point felt like a very like, yeah, joyless recovery. And we can actually put some wings on it and help them to find the joy and find the meaning and find the lessons that they can now use to fortify what they've done, get themselves the rest of the way, and then translate those skills and those lessons that maybe they weren't pointed out to them as they went through their process, to be able to then apply those as life skills that keep them safe from all kinds of things, including eating disorders. That's the joy of this. I say to people all the time, if this job was just about food and meal plans, I would have quit about 5 years ago. It would bore me to tears.
Absolutely. I think that's another thing that I think is just so bad, so bad about coaching. Well,
Exposing ourselves on episode 51.
that's another thing that I think is so useful about coaching and can also really help someone not relapse, because we do really do a lot of the purpose and meaning stuff. Because I then think another reason that I sort of see people drop the ball a little bit in recovery and maybe lapse, or it's looking like maybe like a relapse, is when they don't have that ability to stay connected to themselves, particularly when like life gets busy, say, or like they're going through significant change or something else is happening that sort of like they don't have that ability to connect with themselves, whether it's like a holiday season or family drama or something. And it puts them in this really dangerous state of like that autopilot, and they aren't actually taking the time to finish daily stress cycles. And when you're not aware of the decisions that you're making, or you lack a little bit of that awareness, it is a hell of a lot easier for the eating disorder to slip in if your eyes are closed to how you're actually feeling or what's actually going on the surface. So I then think that kind of what that looks like is when people get really stuck in that doing of being like, I just have to tick these boxes and do this thing, and they're not really finding that really crucial, important time to just be and being added and add the meaning to their experience. Like, why are you actually eating this meal? Why are we actually making this decision?
Yes.
Why, like, we're not just doing these goals because our coach told us, we're doing it because this is the very necessary, tangible step to getting us this way, right? Or like understanding why it's so important to like have some type of practice in the morning where you're thinking about, all right, what's recovery going to look like? Or it's going for a mindful walk, or it's meditating, or it's like something, or journaling, or something to keep you connected into the process. This is such a fundamental thing I work with clients on, because I think when someone relapses, you're not only, sort of halting your recovery in a sense. I also think you're losing a bit of yourself in the sense of you're losing that connection to yourself. And that is the ultimate thing that recovery entirely is offering you. It's like understanding who you are and actually being able to really connect with yourself. So I feel like that all in itself is also such a motivation to stay connected and to stay present in this entire experience.
Yes. And that leads nicely into sort of the sort of final thing we wanted to do in terms of like these relapse focused episodes, which is like, okay, so we know how to identify when this is happening and what to do afterwards, but what are some things without totally, putting relapsing and lapsing on this, terrifying pedestal and giving it more power than it deserves. But there are potentially some things we can do to either not let a lapse turn into a relapse or not enter into a lapse. And one that I put down really ties into that, which is, yes, that self-awareness and that being honest with yourself and staying present with yourself, which is the next step, which is like communicating to your team or to whoever's supporting you how you're actually feeling through the process and what you actually feel capable of, and not letting kind of that perfectionism or that people-pleasing tendency, which a lot of people with eating disorders, I am one of them, tick those boxes as far as some of those traits that were harmful in your eating disorder, not letting them now be harmful in your recovery, where you feel like you have to tick those boxes or you have to show a certain amount of progress, or you can't be honest about, you know what, yes, that goal is uncomfortable enough that I know it's going to move me forward, but you know what, Mia, it's actually so uncomfortable that I feel like I can't do it. I feel like I'm going to be paralyzed, or it is, I'm thinking right now, if I have to do that, I'm definitely going to use a behavior on the other side of it, right? So it's that accountability with self, but also that leaning on other people and being able to be vulnerable and be open about what actually feels possible versus, again, like that dangerous bringing of eating disorder self-values and self-talk into a process that has no space for it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that how that kind of plays out is just having these really important conversations with your coach or whoever that person is for you in your life, it's practicing vulnerability, which, if you are someone who really struggles with that perfectionistic nature, you're probably gonna at times be like, oh yeah, I want to do this recovery because I want this person to be proud of me, or like I don't want to let this person down. So I really feel like I have to meet these goals. And it's these conversations of really putting them back in the driver's seat, being like, you have to do this for you, because you can't be doing it for your therapist, you can't be doing it for your coach. It's your life, like we don't have eating disorders. We've done this work. We're here to support you through it. But I think even conversations like that, as like sort of like stark and confronting as they are, it's this really safe container for so much self-development, because it has to pull them out of this way of thinking. And that's a big thing that coaching does. We're teaching people not only how to recover, well, showing them, not necessarily teaching, but we're also helping them understand that they have to relate to food differently. They have to relate to themselves differently. They have to relate to the interpersonal relationships differently, and to change differently, and to their belief systems differently. And those things happen through like these kind of like this discourse, like through this language, through these conversations of actually really being able to practice vulnerability in real time.
Yeah, I think that anything that takes that battle out of the context of you versus you is, or like whether or not it's adversarial with your treatment team, or if it's, I want you to like me and to be proud of me, that's putting all the responsibility on the other person, right? In terms of how they respond and how they react and how they validate and all that sort of stuff, which again just sets us up for failure, because according to an eating disorder and our, traits or ways of thinking that aren't very healthy or adaptive, there are a million things we can draw from people's responses which make us go, well, I'm not going to do it then. Or, well, see, like that's proof that I should give up, right? Versus the validation coming from within. And it's why I lean so heavily when I especially first start talking to clients. I set them up for how I operate, which is there's going to be no gold stars and there's going to be no black crosses. This is all data. It's all an experiment. How you feel about it is certainly important. How I feel about it is not important at all. It's not making or breaking my day, right? Like when people, because I think that feeds into some other thinking of like, I can get away with this. No, you can't, because the most important person is watching you, and that's you. Like the person who is impacted by eating disorder sneaking back in or trying to get away with it. You're not getting away with it. Like I'm not. It doesn't change how I'm behaving today. It doesn't change how any of your loved ones are behaving today or how they feel. You bear 100% of the consequences. So it's anything that's taking it outside of you, and you have to be having this conversation. You and you have to be in this, eating disorder healthy self dance together. Anytime that tries to get externalized and you try to put that healthy self on somebody else, we are setting up for a dynamic that is going to be pretty unsustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also sort of speaks to the importance of working to strengthen that healthy self. Which, if someone's like, again, like super green into recovery, that healthy self is like, it's there. It's probably non-existent and has never spoken a word in its life.
Yeah.
So that's also such an important part of coaching, of really helping someone understand, like, who is that person, he, she, whoever it is, like give them a name, get to really understand them, know them. Because again, if we're talking about that, like the connection, soul, meaning, purpose aspect of mental health journeys, that is so supportive, because when you're getting to learn your healthy self, which is going to be, your probably one of your best assets when trying to avoid relapse and lapse, is knowing how she can best support you. So this is why I'm saying to clients, like when they are feeling like they're in that autopilot or they're feeling disconnected from it, like go to the places that make you feel most alive. Like talk to the people that remind you of who you are. Do the things that make you feel connected in your life. Because I think all those things, like those little things, they're not, going back to the meal plan and like doing all these really practical recovery stuff, but they're practical things that will help you stay on this path and stay connected to this journey. And I also think they're so fundamental to just generally like your self-development. I'm really big on like self dates, like taking yourself on a self date, whether that's like to a cafe, if that's something you're working on, or just doing something on your own to be completely present with yourself in a environment or in a situation where it doesn't feel super overwhelming or super, super scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one for me is logistical stuff. Like if we do really just get back to that practical logistical stuff, letting your healthy self have a look around and see what you really need to do in order. Like right now, you might feel really healthy self-oriented, but if you've still got food scales sitting in your kitchen cupboard, or you've got those clothes that are body check clothes, we think of body checking as like looking in the mirror. Body checking is so many things. It is trying on clothes that could be a bit of a marker of where your body's sitting, and you're going to have either one reaction or another extreme reaction. It's comparing to other people's bodies. It's, checking old photos and comparing them to current photos. There's so many ways it happens, but there's so many things we can do logistically and practically to just remove layers of temptation, right? It's kind of like if you're trying to quit, alcohol or something like that. Do you keep a bottle of wine in the cupboard? No, probably not, right? It's if you don't have it in the house, then there's all these steps you have to take to be able to access it, which gives your healthy self all these opportunities to wake up and go, why am I going to Kmart to buy food scales? Why am I going to the gym to weigh myself? Why am I stuck in traffic doing this? And then you've got more time to also reach out and to, get that external accountability going. So I think some of those things that we can do, like for instance, if I set a goal with a client and it's around a snack and we're adding something to a snack that week, my first question is, do you have that in the house? No. Okay. When are we going to the shops to get it? Because your eating disorder will wait until the 6th day before the 7th day when you're due to see me again. And then suddenly we're very flustered and we feel very disappointed in ourselves and it all just feels awful. And then you don't want to have your session. And then it's just sort of falling apart in this way that if we had been more proactive, and I think part of what we are teaching people is live proactively, not reactively. Obviously, there's sometimes where you are naturally, from a human perspective, going to be reactive, but eating disorders cope pretty much purely reactively. They're incredibly reactive in terms of their emotional processes, the behaviors they want to use. Their impulse control is nothing, right? It's right down there. Have no conception of like even in half an hour how we're going to feel after using a behavior. They just want right now. So I think some of that proactive planning is, and it's also something we as coaches, like we're doing stuff on forensic levels with people where it's like, okay, let's actually go through the list of the stuff we need to do to enable you to have the best possible week you can have.
Yeah. And I think to piggyback, we need a different word for that.
I just have a
Additionally,
visual of us like leapfrogging. Like
I think on that, it's like, yeah, it's like it's so important to know what are your triggers, right? And like what are your red flags? But even more than that, like what are your orange flags? Because I feel like a couple of shades of orange equals red. And a lot of this stuff is so nuanced to the individual and to their vulnerabilities and to things that could be wobbly for them. Because, you know, I could look at a client and their red and orange flags are completely different to someone else. Like someone could have like an orange flag, which is someone else's orange flag, and I'm not worried at all. It is so dependent on that person in their unique situation as well. So which really speaks to you have to understand your own triggers. You have to understand your own red flags. And then from there, then having that, you know, level of accountability or being able to push yourself to ask for help when you need it. And I mean, I feel like we sound like a broken record saying this, like we say it every episode of learning to help seek. Like this is why it's so important because this is the time that you would need to use it the most. I feel like those two things, and then also being able to engage in those self-care practices that keep you really connected to this journey.
yeah.
I think are fundamental things I would say for someone to read.
I think it's so nice as well, just when you have someone come back to you, be like, oh, no problem. Like we've got that. Yeah, cool. Try this. Right. As like you've spent all this time in your head catastrophizing or thinking this means XYZ, like that gap between lapsing and relapsing of like how much time have you spent in your head turning something which is like a 2 out of 10 issue, and then in your head it becomes a 10 out of 10, so you start behaving like it's a 10 out of 10 even though realistically it's a 2. So to have someone to even check that against who's just like, oh no, that's sweet, like here, like here's 3 things you can try and then like let me know how they go. And then even just that, they're like, okay, I feel like I'll get an email being like, oh, you know, you wrote back and I read it and I just got a bit teary because like it just felt like such a relief, and I think that's all I really needed. They don't even need to do the practical stuff. It's just the not letting them go to like the big deal place that they don't have to go to.
Yes. And you know, when you receive one of those messages from a client, you're like, you're in the spiral. You actually can reverse a spiral.
Yeah.
Just like visually think about it. We're in the spiral. We've made this like huge mountain. Just stop. Let's just reverse it. A lot of the time, it doesn't have to be that much of a big deal.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, but not always.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, getting some of that triggering stuff, and even things like, you know, at some point I'll always do like a social media inventory with people because I'll just get a sense of like, oh, we've kind of cleared all this stuff out, but there just seems to be these moments when, and then I'll find out about the doom scrolling and then, you know, the accounts they're following, and someone who they're following who was seemingly doing really well in recovery has relapsed, which is why we say, please don't follow people who are in active recovery. Because it's like having Russian roulette on your phone. You just never know what's really going on with somebody and what kind of update you're going to get. But I just think that there's things that we can do. We're not recovering in a bubble, but we're being proactive and we're being knowledgeable in terms of our recovery, what those needs are, and then matching them up to what we can execute. And I think it's also just a great lesson in healthy control. That if we all really want control out of this, that is inhuman. Show me somebody who doesn't want a modicum of control over their life and how they feel and what direction they're heading in. That is not just an eating disorder person thing, even though it's such a huge negative part of the stigma. But if you really want healthy control, we can teach you ways to do it. But it's knowing yourself, knowing what the precursors are to when you start to slide. And as I think we said in the last episode, that will benefit you not only in your recovery, but it'll just help you to get to know your patterns as a human being so that you don't have to spend any time even beyond recovery heading down spirals.
I also think being able to do this, it puts the individual in this position of empowerment as opposed to feeling like they're super scared and they're just in this like fierce state of this thing happening, but rather being like, I think when you're proactive about it, you're like, yeah, cool. It feels like, again, it doesn't seem like it's this like huge, big, scary thing. It actually feels really manageable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's part of it is just how we talk to ourselves about the process, right? How we talk to ourselves about what's happening is such a huge aspect of it. And I think also just being able to, like, going back to what we were talking about before, like being able to, yes, in the immediate sense, do some planning, but to also do some like long-term planning as well. Like when I was going through difficult moments in life, some of that stuff that I was referencing at the top of the episode about, my breakthrough moments, which also coincided with lapses or were contributors to potential relapses, meant that I really learned, like when I had big life events coming up or big things that I could see would potentially send me on a bit of a wobble or would take my focus off recovery, I would mention it to my psychologist and be like, there's this thing going on, or, I'm going to be traveling or going on holiday in a month or whatever, like that long-term planning that like sometimes a client will say to me, oh, I'm going away for 10 days next week. And I'm like, when do you leave? And they're like, in like 3 days. It's Friday. They're going away Monday. And I'm like, okay, we're down to the final 5 minutes of the session. And we've got to really pull something together here. And I'm going to be on my email till about 7 or 8, putting together an action plan for them. Holy Jesus. All right. Could have probably used another week at least. Like those things that, well, not even that, but just as a default to put, anything, whether it's a big emotional thing that's coming up, like it might be an anniversary, like for me next month with Dad's anniversary of his passing. I know then that I need to be really mindful of how I'm spending my time and who I'm spending my time with and how, I'm using my energy and what am I going to do on that day, and not just letting these things like sneak up on you. And particularly from that support professional perspective, equip your professionals because they will be able to help you navigate that. Even just knowing, like when I will extend my email support to people who, like, let's say they have a wedding coming up in a month and my weekend is pretty free that day, or like my Saturday is pretty free that day. I'll say to them, when's the wedding? Cool. From when the morning when you're getting ready until like you get home, I'll be on email. I'll check it every hour or so. If you need a place to vent, or that annoying uncle who tends to make comments about people's bodies says something about your body, email me. Like we'll strategize. Majority of the time I don't hear from them, because just knowing that they've got me in their back pocket is such a comfort to them that they don't even really need to action the extra layer of help. So I think that, yes, short-term planning, but just that long-term looking out for yourself and giving your professionals the information. Nothing's ever too big that we can't reduce, at least, the impact of something that might be coming up for you.
Yeah, exactly. And even like around holidays, around Christmas, we do a lot of this work with people, sort of preparing them for the holiday season when there will be like naturally like family and different foods and stresses and things.
Yeah.
And that preventative work is ultimately like the number one thing that's going to help people even like curve a lapse or like curve a relapse so it doesn't have, like you're saying, as much of a heavy impact.
Yeah, it's like we can either skid in on our bum or we can like crash land.
We can roll, yeah.
If we can help you to figure out how to come in with not such a bumpy landing, you might be able to get up and stand up and keep moving a little bit sooner than you realize.
For sure.
Yeah. Beautiful, fabulous. I think this was super helpful, practical, a little bit deeper. We try to do a little bit of all of it. Where are we going to be when we see you next?
Look, I don't know. It depends when we're recording a podcast episode. I think I'll be in the Canary Islands or I'll be in Paris. One of the two things.
I want to like turn you into a vlogger so that I can I can insert everything that you're doing and be like, one of us has a really exciting life. But that is super exciting. I really appreciate all your Instagram updates. I know you're not a huge
fan for you,
but I love them, and you have a real skill. I'm like, oh yeah, this is like travel influencer stuff all over it. It's beautiful.
I think it's very easy when you're in Europe. Everything is just so beautiful. Like it's like really hard to make something that like looks crap. Like everything's just so beautiful.
Imagine if you did that. I saw a TikTok the other day that was like, just want people to know the reality of really traveling through Australia. And do you know what they were? They were like, you see all the beaches and the cities, and it doesn't really look like that. It's like, it does. But anyway, they filmed like on a train, like going through like tunnels and all the back blocks of Sydney, like on the train between two suburbs. And it's like, well, they don't tend to put train lines through, I don't know, like the ocean or a garden or the beach. So yeah, you're probably going to see not beautiful areas when you're on a train. in the inner city pretty much anywhere.
I think people have a bit too much time. I feel like
Too much
TikTok,
time.
yeah,
You know
people
what
have too
people
much
have? I've
news.
I've discovered what I hate about this day and age of social media, says the person who documented recovery on the internet, is main character syndrome is driving me nuts.
I thought you liked it. I thought you
I mean,
liked
I don't
being.
know, I do in my personal life, but I mean on social media where it's like people having beefs with their best friend and putting it out to the internet before they talk to their best friend about it. And it's like millions of people see it. And then it turns into this feud. And I'm like, this is a text message. Just send a text message.
I can't even comprehend that
Never.
use of technology in my mind. Like I'm not on TikTok and I'm on Instagram, not really much either, but it just seems bizarre. What does everyone do in the day?
I
Like, is
know.
everyone just like a TikTok? I don't know what it's called, like an influencer? But
Imagine
just have
opening,
people.
imagine opening up TikTok and your best friend is like airing you out and showing all of your text messages.
Well,
And you're
that's probably how they're probably expecting it. That's just what everyone does.
like,
Not us.
no,
We'll
thank
just stick
you.
to our retro podcast setups.
No, I'll just air out other influencers when I don't approve of what they're doing. Kidding. That's my old era. I don't do that anymore. But always so fabulous to see you. We will organize obviously another time to get to have a chat with the people. And also I've had, and I know you have too, we've had so many beautiful messages and comments of late. Like I see them coming through with our client requests all the time. I got one today. We see them in the comment section on YouTube. I know that, our clients give us feedback as well. We so appreciate all the love and all of the feedback about the podcast. I know I love doing it for you guys. I know Hole loves doing it for you guys. Like it's just such a pleasure and a joy. But we really appreciate always the encouragement and feedback and, sort of your active participation. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's such a great part of the job. I love it so much.
Yeah. Wonderful. All righty. Well, I'll see you soon.
Ciao.